My beloved child. No one expected this moment to arrive in such silence. Not because nothing had changed, but because the deepest changes often make no sound at all. Somewhere beyond everything you can currently see, a heart that has been holding back far too much has finally reached the point where remaining silent feels heavier than speaking. That is why this message exists. It was never created to interrupt your day. It was created because someone connected to your story could no longer keep certain feelings hidden inside. Don't skip, because every passing sentence carries another small piece of what has remained unspoken until now, and something important is waiting for you before this part comes to its end. The soul you have been thinking about more often than you admit has spent countless quiet moments replaying memories that nobody else knows exist. Ordinary moments became extraordinary simply because you were part of them. A smile you may have forgotten, a conversation that seemed too small to matter, a single act of kindness that disappeared from your own memory long ago, these became treasured chapters in someone else's heart. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes we walk away believing a moment has ended, while another person continues living inside that same memory for weeks, months, or even longer. Recently, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand announcement. No unexpected spectacle. It happened during one of those ordinary hours when life appears completely unchanged from the outside. Yet within that ordinary moment, your soulmate reached an unexpected realization. They finally understood that delaying certain words was creating more distance than protecting themselves ever could. For the first time, they quietly admitted to themselves that waiting forever was no longer the answer. But even after accepting that truth, they still hesitated. Why? Because they kept asking themselves one question over and over again. What if my message arrives too late? That question lingered long after everything else had faded away. Perhaps you have sensed something similar yourself. Maybe there have been moments when your thoughts wandered toward someone without any clear reason. Perhaps a familiar feeling appeared unexpectedly while driving, working, or simply sitting in silence. You tried to explain it away. Yet some feelings refuse simple explanations. They return gently, patiently, almost as though they are reminding you not to ignore what your heart already noticed before your mind did. Stay till the end, because the reason behind those quiet moments is only beginning to unfold. The message your soulmate longs to share isn't built from perfect words. It isn't polished. It isn't rehearsed. In fact, that is exactly why it matters. Honest emotions rarely arrive dressed in perfection. They often appear carrying uncertainty, hope, and vulnerability all at once. Somewhere inside, they wish you could hear the sentence they have repeated to themselves more times than they could ever count. I hope they still believe in us. Notice those words carefully. Not certainty. Not expectation. Hope. Hope is what survives when pride becomes too exhausting to carry. There were opportunities to speak sooner. Opportunities quietly slipped away because both timing and courage refused to arrive together. Every time one appeared, the other seemed absent. And so silence continued growing, not because affection disappeared, but because uncertainty became louder than confidence. Yet silence has limits. Eventually every sincere feeling reaches a point where remaining hidden becomes impossible. That point is closer than either of you realize. If you could see through their eyes for only a single moment, you might notice something surprising. They are not imagining a perfect future. They are remembering genuine moments that already proved something meaningful existed. They remember laughter that arrived unexpectedly. Conversations that lasted longer than planned. Comfortable pauses where neither of you needed to say anything at all. Those moments became evidence that what they felt was real. Even now, they wonder whether you remember them with the same quiet warmth. That question has followed them through ordinary mornings and peaceful evenings alike. And perhaps the answer has been much closer than either of you expected. There is another detail they have never shared with anyone. Whenever they imagined finally speaking openly, they never pictured dramatic speeches or unforgettable gestures. Instead, they imagined something astonishingly simple. Sitting beside you. Looking into your eyes without rushing. Allowing honesty to replace uncertainty. Letting silence become peaceful instead of confusing. Because sometimes the greatest conversations begin with only one brave sentence. I've wanted to tell you this for a long time. Everything changes after those words. Not instantly. Not magically. But gently. Naturally. Like sunrise replacing darkness without asking permission. The remarkable part is that this realization did not appear because life suddenly became easier. It appeared because pretending became harder than telling the truth. That quiet shift is what brought this message into existence. Not urgency born from fear, but urgency born from sincerity. Don't skip, because one final thought remains hidden inside today's message. Your soulmate has reached a place where they no longer measure your connection by perfect timing. Instead, they measure it by something much quieter, the way certain people continue finding space inside each other's hearts even after long periods of silence. That realization has changed the way they see everything. And just when they believed they were finally ready to reveal the one sentence they have protected for so long, something unexpected happened. It wasn't spoken aloud. It wasn't planned. Yet it changed the direction of everything that comes next. And that is where this chapter quietly ends, while the message they have been longing to share finally begins to reveal itself. Something unusual happened after that quiet turning point, not around them, but within them. The kind of change that cannot be measured by clocks or calendars. It arrived the moment they stopped asking themselves whether they should reach out, and started wondering whether you had already been waiting longer than they realized. That single thought stayed with them, following them through ordinary routines until nothing felt quite as ordinary anymore. Stay till the end, because the words they have been holding back are drawing closer than ever before. Every heart has a place where unfinished conversations continue living long after the voices become silent. Your soulmate discovered that place unexpectedly. They believed they had moved beyond certain memories, yet each memory quietly returned carrying another detail they had overlooked before. It wasn't the dramatic moments that came back first. It was the gentle ones. The comfortable silence. The effortless laughter. The glance that lasted only a second but somehow remained unforgettable. They finally understood something that surprised even them. The strongest connections are rarely built during extraordinary events. They are built during ordinary moments that somehow refuse to fade. That realization unsettled them, not because it frightened them, but because it revealed how deeply your presence had become woven into their story. They began noticing reminders of you in places where they never expected them. A familiar melody. A quiet evening sky. the warmth of morning sunlight passing through a window. None of these things were extraordinary by themselves. Yet each one carried a gentle reminder that some people become part of the way we experience the world without ever intending to. Don't skip, because this is where the message begins changing direction. For the first time, they stopped asking what they should say. Instead, they asked what you deserve to hear. Those are two very different questions. The first seeks the perfect words. The second seeks honest ones. And honesty has a remarkable way of dissolving walls that perfection never could. So they imagined the conversation once more. Not the version where every sentence sounded flawless. Not the version where every uncertainty disappeared. But the real version. The one where their voice trembles slightly because the feelings behind it matter too much to hide. The one where they finally admit, "I've carried these thoughts much longer than I ever intended." Even imagining those words brought unexpected peace. Not because everything suddenly became certain, but because truth always feels lighter than pretending. Meanwhile, something equally meaningful has been happening within you, even if you haven't fully recognized it yet. Certain questions have appeared without invitation. Certain feelings have returned when you least expected them. Certain moments have made you pause for reasons you couldn't quite explain. What if those moments were never random? What if they were simply reminders that some connections continue growing quietly, even while life seems to move in different directions? Your soulmate has wondered that very same thing. Again and again. They've questioned whether invisible threads really exist between two hearts that genuinely care about one another. Then one evening, while sitting alone with nothing but their own thoughts, they reached a realization so simple that it almost made them smile. Perhaps meaningful connections don't disappear. Perhaps they simply wait for two people to become brave enough to notice them again. Something important is waiting for you. Because after arriving at that realization, they made themselves a quiet promise. No more hiding behind perfect timing. No more convincing themselves that tomorrow would always be better than today. No more believing that silence protects anyone. From that moment forward, every excuse they once relied upon began losing its strength. Still, one final hesitation remained. Not because they doubted their feelings. Because they cared deeply about yours. They never wanted their honesty to become a burden. They never wanted their message to arrive at the wrong moment. So instead of rushing forward, they paused one last time. Not to retreat, but to make sure the words they chose would leave peace behind rather than confusion. That pause became the most meaningful silence of all. Because inside it, they finally discovered the sentence they had been searching for from the beginning. A sentence so genuine that once spoken, nothing between the two of you could ever feel quite the same again. And just as those words settled quietly into their heart, an unexpected sign appeared. It wasn't loud. It wasn't impossible to miss because of its size. It was unforgettable because of its meaning. The moment they recognized it, they whispered something they had never dared whisper before. And those whispered words are the very beginning of what comes next. A single quiet whisper has a way of echoing much farther than a loud declaration ever could. That was the discovery waiting for your soulmate on the other side of that unforgettable moment. The words barely escaped their lips, yet something inside them immediately felt different, as though they had finally stopped running from a truth that had been patiently waiting for them all along. Don't skip, because what followed wasn't dramatic on the outside, but it changed everything within. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by hesitation. They stopped replaying every "what if" and began paying attention to one much gentler question. What if hope has been quietly growing this entire time? That thought stayed with them through the rest of the day. It followed them into the evening. It remained there when the world became quiet. And strangely enough, instead of creating uncertainty, it brought peace. There is something remarkable about hearts that finally become honest with themselves. They stop searching for impossible guarantees. They begin appreciating simple truths instead. Your soulmate realized they didn't need to predict every outcome before speaking. They only needed the courage to be genuine. That realization became the beginning of a transformation they never expected. The memories they once viewed with regret slowly began looking different. Instead of seeing missed opportunities, they began seeing preparation. Instead of believing the waiting had been meaningless, they started believing it had quietly taught them patience, understanding, and gratitude for the connection they never truly stopped valuing. Stay till the end, because the most meaningful realization hasn't arrived yet. They found themselves smiling at memories they once struggled to revisit. Not because the past had changed. Because they had. Growth has an extraordinary way of transforming old chapters without rewriting a single word. Even the smallest details suddenly carried new meaning. The conversation that ended too soon. The goodbye that felt unfinished. The silence that seemed confusing. Each memory now whispered the same gentle reminder. Not everything unfinished is broken. Sometimes a story pauses simply because both people are still becoming the versions of themselves that the next chapter requires. That thought settled deeply within them. Perhaps more deeply than they expected. Then another realization quietly appeared. They understood they had spent far too much time wondering whether you remembered them, without considering that perhaps you had also carried questions of your own. Maybe you wondered why certain words were never spoken. Maybe you questioned whether those quiet moments meant as much to them as they meant to you. Maybe both hearts had been protecting themselves in almost identical ways. The possibility made them pause. Because suddenly the distance between you no longer felt like separation. It felt like two people standing on opposite sides of the same bridge. Both waiting for someone to take the first step. Something important is waiting for you. Because this next realization became impossible for them to ignore. They no longer wished to impress you. They wished to understand you. They no longer wanted perfect timing. They wanted genuine presence. They no longer dreamed about extraordinary moments. They dreamed about ordinary days shared honestly. Morning conversations. Comfortable laughter. Peaceful silence. Simple happiness. The kind of connection that quietly grows stronger because neither person feels the need to pretend. That dream became clearer every passing day. Yet one question remained quietly hidden inside their heart. Would you recognize the sincerity behind their words if they finally reached you? Not the polished version. Not the carefully rehearsed version. The real version. The one carrying equal parts hope and vulnerability. They believed you would. Not because life always unfolds perfectly, but because genuine kindness has a remarkable ability to recognize genuine kindness. As that belief grew stronger, they began preparing themselves in small ways nobody else noticed. They became more patient, more grateful, more willing to speak honestly instead of protecting themselves behind silence. Without realizing it, they were already becoming the person they had hoped to be when that long-awaited conversation finally arrived. And then, while looking back through one ordinary memory they had almost forgotten, they noticed one tiny detail that had escaped them all this time. A detail so simple, yet so meaningful, that it completely changed what they believed your last goodbye had actually meant. The moment that hidden meaning became clear, their heart whispered one unexpected sentence. And maybe, they were hoping I would understand all along. That quiet realization became the doorway to the next chapter, where the message they have been longing to share is no longer just a possibility, but something they are finally preparing to place into words. There are moments when the heart recognizes a truth long before the mind is ready to accept it. That was the quiet place your soulmate found themselves standing in. Nothing around them appeared different. The world continued moving at its usual pace. Yet inside, something had settled with remarkable clarity. The questions that once echoed endlessly had begun giving way to answers that required no argument. Don't skip, because the next piece of this journey reveals why this message could no longer remain unspoken. The memory that returned to them was almost invisible. It wasn't the beginning of your story. It wasn't the moment you first crossed paths. It wasn't even one of the conversations either of you would probably describe as unforgettable. It was something much smaller. A pause. A brief look that lasted only a heartbeat. A moment where words stopped, yet understanding somehow continued. For years they believed nothing important had happened during that silence. Now they realized that silence had been speaking all along. Some connections never announce themselves with noise. They reveal themselves through peace. The kind of peace that quietly says, you don't have to become someone else to be understood here. That realization stayed with them longer than any conversation ever had. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you, and it begins with a realization they never expected. They started asking themselves a different question. Not, why did everything happen this way? But, what was this journey trying to teach me? The answer came gently. It taught them that affection grows strongest where patience has been allowed to breathe. It taught them that genuine care isn't measured by constant conversation, but by the quiet consistency of someone's place within your heart. It taught them that distance can never erase what was built through sincerity. And most of all, it taught them that some people never truly leave your thoughts because they were never meant to become ordinary memories. That understanding filled them with an unexpected calm. The urgency they once felt slowly transformed. No longer an urgency born from uncertainty, but one born from gratitude. Gratitude that there was still an opportunity to speak honestly. Gratitude that hope had survived every unanswered question. Gratitude that your story still felt unfinished. For the first time, they stopped imagining how you might respond. Instead, they focused on what they wanted you to know regardless of the outcome. That change was powerful. Because honesty offered without expectation carries a rare kind of freedom. If they could place only one thought into your hands, it would be this: "You mattered more than I ever found the courage to say." Not because life revolved around you. Not because every day was perfect. But because your presence quietly became part of the way they understood kindness, trust, and hope. Those gifts remain long after individual moments have passed. Don't skip. Because another unexpected discovery was quietly waiting. As they reflected on everything they had never said, they noticed something remarkable. Every regret they carried had one thing in common. None of them came from loving too deeply. Every regret came from waiting too long to express what was already true. That realization felt both humbling and freeing. It reminded them that sincerity loses nothing by being spoken with gentleness. In fact, it often gives peace to both hearts at once. Since then, they have found themselves noticing little signs of quiet encouragement everywhere. Not extraordinary signs. Simple reminders. A familiar phrase heard at the perfect moment. A sunrise that seemed brighter than usual. An old melody returning unexpectedly. Each one gently reminded them that hope often arrives disguised as ordinary life. And perhaps the same has been happening for you. Perhaps those moments that made you pause were never asking you to solve a mystery. Perhaps they were simply inviting you to remain open to what life still has left to reveal. That thought became precious to them. Because it replaced pressure with patience. Expectation with trust. Restlessness with quiet confidence. Now, whenever they think of you, they no longer imagine impossible scenarios. They imagine something beautifully simple. A conversation where neither of you feels the need to hide behind careful words. A moment where honesty arrives naturally. A smile that says more than explanations ever could. They believe that if such a moment comes, it won't feel unfamiliar. It will feel like returning to a place your hearts quietly remembered all along. But just as they reached that peaceful understanding, one final memory surfaced. A memory they had almost forgotten because it seemed too ordinary to matter. Yet hidden inside that forgotten moment was one small detail. A single sentence you once shared without realizing how deeply it would remain with them. Only now did they finally understand what those words truly meant. And the meaning behind that forgotten sentence became the very reason they decided. The next message could not remain inside their heart any longer. There are words that seem ordinary when they are first spoken, yet years later they return carrying an entirely different meaning. That forgotten sentence lingered quietly within your soulmate's heart until one peaceful evening, when its true message finally revealed itself. It was never hidden because it was complicated. It was hidden because the heart understands certain things only after it has learned patience. Stay till the end, because the meaning they discovered became the reason they could no longer remain silent. They remembered the exact feeling more clearly than the exact words. The world around them had been moving as usual. People were talking. Life continued without pause. Yet somehow, everything faded into the background for just a brief moment. Your voice remained. Not because it was louder than everyone else's. Because it carried a kindness that expected nothing in return. That simple kindness became something they returned to whenever life felt uncertain. Without realizing it, you had become one of the safest memories they possessed. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Simply peaceful. And peace is far rarer than excitement. The more they reflected on that memory, the more another realization quietly unfolded. They had spent so much time hoping you would understand them, that they had almost forgotten to appreciate how deeply you had already understood parts of them without either of you speaking openly. Some people listen only to words. Others quietly notice the spaces between them. They believe you were always someone who noticed those spaces. Don't skip. Because this next realization changed everything. They finally understood why they could never completely let go of the thought of you. It wasn't because they were holding on to the past. It was because your story inside their heart had never actually reached its ending. Every chapter they imagined somehow circled back to the same quiet hope. Maybe one day we'll simply speak honestly. No grand performance. No impossible expectations. Just two people allowing truth to arrive without fear of being misunderstood. That hope remained alive through every ordinary season. Sometimes it became quieter. Sometimes it grew stronger. But it never disappeared. Instead, it patiently waited for courage to become greater than hesitation. And then, something remarkable happened. One morning, they caught themselves smiling for no obvious reason. There was no message. No unexpected meeting. No life-changing event. Only one peaceful thought. What if they're closer to this moment than I realize? That single question filled them with calm instead of uncertainty. For the first time, they stopped trying to control the timing of everything. They simply decided they would be ready whenever the right conversation arrived. That decision changed the way they carried themselves. They became lighter. More present. More grateful. Instead of wondering what might never happen, they began preparing themselves for what still could. Something important is waiting for you. Because while they were embracing this new peace, another memory quietly returned. This one wasn't about a conversation. It wasn't about laughter. It wasn't even about a special day. It was about a promise they made to themselves without realizing it. The promise was simple. If I ever get another chance, I won't let fear speak louder than my heart. They had forgotten making that promise. Until now. The moment they remembered it, everything suddenly aligned. The waiting. The growth. The unanswered questions. Even the silence. None of it had been empty. It had been preparing them for honesty. And honesty, they realized, doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives one brave sentence at a time. So they began quietly imagining the first sentence they would say if your paths crossed again. Not a dramatic confession. Not an explanation for every lost moment. Just something sincere enough to open the door. Perhaps. I've been meaning to tell you something for a long time. Or maybe. I hope you know how much your kindness stayed with me. No matter which words came first, the feeling behind them would remain the same. Real. Gentle. Unhidden. Yet just as they felt completely ready to let those words finally leave their heart, someone unexpectedly shared a small piece of news. It wasn't shocking because of how loud it was. It was shocking because of what it quietly confirmed. The moment they heard it, they fell completely silent. Not out of confusion, but because it answered the one question they had been carrying all this time. And that answer became the beginning of everything that follows.